I want to say a special thanks to the Kelly Writers House for sponsoring us. And then you'll see we have very capable students back there handling all our IT and videography. And then we also have students helping us with the feast, of which we will partake after the reading. Our Pen and Pencil group is a long-standing writers group at University of Pennsylvania that's been going for longer than 20 years. There's a founding member in here, John Shea, and another founding member, Wendy Washburn, is watching us. I guess we're on YouTube from the Northwest, because she moved out to Seattle to be with her family. Hi, Wendy. Okay. And I just wanted to say, so our group is mainly faculty and staff who work here at University of Penn, but we have members who have retired and stay with the group, or were connected with Penn or CHOP or the hospital in some way and find the group. Our group is open to new members at all time. You can just email, it's actually my email, Llewellyn@Penn Medicine. It's also posted on the Kelly Writers House website. But we take in new members frequently. People kind of move in and out of our group. Our group has nonfiction writers, memoir, some people are writing novels. We have poets, we have fantasists, we have science fiction writers. And I think everybody in the group just really loves the group because it's fun to see everybody, but we also get really good feedback and critique. And I know this for myself because I self-published a book during COVID, and really many of the poems in there were workshopped, and I got a lot of help from my peers, colleagues, and partners in crime who are in this room. See, I did it again. My name is Llewellyn Fletcher, and I am the coordinator, facilitator. Linda said I'm the boss. That would be a stretch. But let's get started, and we're going to start with Sam Smith. Each reader will just introduce himself, herself, theirselves, and what they're going to read. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sam Smith. The story I'm going to read, this is an excerpt from a longer short story called Bike Church. The main character is a woman named Els, short for Elspeth. She's a non-tenure track professor. Els' daughter needed a car, and Els needed exercise, so she's loaned her car to her daughter in exchange for her daughter's bike, which is a heavy, pink, old-fashioned bike. One day on her way to work, the chain fell off of Elle's bike, and someone else had to fix it for her. And the person who fixed it suggested that Elle should take a bicycle maintenance class. And that's where we begin. 10 Minutes Online had turned up community bikes with a 3-week class for neophytes. Els had signed up, and here she was. A man about Elle's age walked over to the table where all the students were sitting. Hi, I'm Richard. I'm your instructor. He dropped a small stack of printed pages on the table. Can you pass that around? That has the syllabus. Let's introduce ourselves, names, and what you want to get out of the class. V, you want to go first? A lovely young woman standing next to Richard immediately dropped her head. She mumbled, I already know about bikes. I'm here to help Richard teach. And your name, nudged Richard. I'm V. Richard then nodded at the absurdly handsome young man standing next to V. The youth tilted his head up, seeming to address some point above everyone's heads. I'm Barrett. I teach the class with Richard. I can help you with anything. Richard pointed at Els. And you? I'm Els, which is short for Elspeth. I'm here to learn as much as I can. I started riding a bike 4 weeks ago for the first time in a very long time. Around the room, 2 more women, 5 men introduced themselves. As Els had feared, she was at least 20 years older than every other student. After the introductions, Richard resumed. The first thing we'll learn about is tires. Sooner or later, if you have a bicycle, you will have to fix a flat. He held up a bicycle wheel and started describing a seemingly endless range of tire variations. Els mentally hummed through this discussion. Whatever was already on her daughter's bike was going to stay there. Richard told V to inflate a tire tube. Immediately, once it was inflated, Els could hear the faint squeal of air leaving the tube. V walked around the table, waving the tube in front of each student so they could feel the stream of escaping air. V then patched the tube, with Richard providing commentary like a sports announcer. Now it's your turn, Richard said. We have a bunch of tubes with leaks. Grab one, find the leak, and patch it. Els had taken down notes, as any student should. She followed them now, while Richard circled the room looking at student progress. V didn't circle. She stood behind Els, silent. Slightly unnerved, Els decided to draw her in. She asked, "Can you tell me about bike chains?" V stepped forward where Els could see her. She looked a little more confident now. "What do you want to know?" "Mine fell off one day, and I didn't know how to get it back on. Is there a tool for that?" "No, they just fall off sometimes. You grab the chain and put it back on." "But it's filthy." "That's lubricant. It's not dirt." Richard was near with Barrett. He said, "Use latex gloves like doctors wear. Carry a pair with you. I always do." Richard then looked at V. "How's it going?" She shrugged. "Okay, we're waiting for the glue to dry." Richard walked away, but Barrett was staring with fascination at Els' bike. "This is amazing," he said. "It's like 1950 met a Disney princess." Els smiled. Els smiled. "My daughter's. She just graduated from college, and she needs a car, so I traded her." "You lost," Barrett said. "You should get rid of some weight." Els started. "Get rid of the fenders first," and then he continued, "the kickstand, then the basket on the handlebars." "Or just get a new bike," Barrett said, spinning away to another student. V and Els both watched Barrett's retreating backside. V said, "Barrett knows everything about bikes." "It's good he knows something because he doesn't know anything about manners." "He's right. You should get rid of the fenders and the kickstand." "Don't the fenders keep me from getting splashed?" "Yeah, but they add weight. They slow you down." "I teach. I'm not going to show up on campus splattered in mud." "And how do I park the bike if I take the kickstand off?" "You just lean it. There's always something to lean it against." So often while teaching, Els could not ask the kids the questions she wanted to ask. Now she was a student. "Why are you here, V?" V looked abashed. "Whenever I'm here, I'm always asking people in here for tools, and I don't know what they're called. Richard said I should help him teach, and I should learn the names of everything." Els laughed. "Today we have naming of parts." "What does that mean?" "It's from a poem." V scowled. "You're not a fan of poetry," said Els. "It's annoying. It's like it's written not to make sense." "Or maybe they want you to find your own sense. You sound like a teacher." "I am a professor." "Oh." V looked down, picked up a tool, held it up toward Els. "See this? It's a screwdriver. If somebody says, 'What's that?' you say, 'It's a screwdriver.' What does it do? It drives screws. Poems aren't like that. They could be anything. That drives me crazy." Els was slightly irked. She had the I hate poetry discussion every semester. Untenured, she always taught the Gen Ed Lit classes stuffed with business and chemistry majors. Somehow, she was having the same discussion now in a bicycle repair class. At least here, she could say what she really thought. "What about the drink?" Els asked. "What? A screwdriver can be a drink, right?" "That's not the same thing at all." "Exactly. It's one word meaning two completely different things." V insisted, "That's a different kind of different." And she giggled at what she had just said. Els sighed. "V, it's a poem about guns and war and sex and about being bored in class. Surely you can relate to that." Els stopped. V was blushing furiously. Now Els felt embarrassed herself for picking on someone less than half her own age. "I'm sorry, V. You don't have to like it. We all like different things. She waved her hand in the air. "It's been 10 minutes. Let's check my work." And that's the end. And now Alex.
Hello, everyone. My name's Alex. My piece is titled Fallout Shelter Blues.
Wait a minute. Can that be so he doesn't have to bend down?
Yes.
Does it screw or?
Yeah, Andrew.
Probably gonna have to put it back down later, but.
Thank you. Testing. Thanks. Fallout Shelter Blues. April 1st. The bombs dropped. How's that for a hook? You never think it'll happen to you. The threat of nuclear Armageddon is always someone else's problem. The kind of far-off peril that solely affects other people. It's only when you're crammed into a dark bunker with 5 of your coworkers and only one bathroom that you realize, oh, I'm other people. It could have been worse. Things could always be worse. We were the lucky ones. In the right place at the right time when the sirens went off. Tucker was the one that spotted the abandoned church, bearing the faded but unmistakable sign saying, Fallout Shelter. I would like to say that, in the heat of the moment, we proceeded towards the building in a calm and dignified fashion. It wouldn't be true, but I'd at least like to say it. To our collective surprise and relief, the doors were, miraculously, unlocked. The same was true for the heavy iron door deep in the basement. We didn't think twice about heaving it open and fumbling our way inside. Fielding had her pen light on hand, so thankfully we weren't in complete darkness. Wyndham suggested we keep the door open for stragglers, but that was stupid, and we told him as much. Sure enough, only minutes after the heavy slab of metal was sealed, the earth began to shake, rumbling like the plant had fallen into a blender. This was followed by a violent crashing from above, great enough to rain dust down upon us from the ceiling. Then, just as suddenly as it started, it was over. And there we were. We've managed to get the power going, and as I'm writing this, the 6 of us are huddling around the radio, listening to strike reports come in from across the globe. The Geiger counter by the door, meanwhile, is still going crazy, clicking like an over-caffeinated grasshopper. Chances are we'll be here a while. On the bright side, I found this blank book among the supplies, so at least I can pass the time journaling. It's the little things. April 2nd. The counter continues to hiss at us, so, for the time being, we're stuck. Boole, the only one of us with a background in physics, claims that, depending on the type of bomb that hit, The radioactive fallout could last anywhere from a couple of weeks to a matter of years. Fun. The shelter, all 400 square feet of it, seems fairly secure. Despite the dim lighting, lack of privacy, and shrill whistling coming from the single vent, the space is technically livable. Not ideal in any sense of the word, but when it comes to doomsday, you gotta take what you can get. I'll say this much. The bare cement walls and ceiling, though drab, did manage to withstand the brunt of the blast, which is about as much as you can ask for in a nuclear bunker. No one got hurt, thankfully, though I am a bit dizzy from the shock. There's a lot of that going around. The mood's been low ever since the radio transmission yesterday. By the time the announcer's grim voice fizzled away to static, it was easier to count the major cities not blown to Kingdom Come. I'm really not sure how to process it. I don't think any of us are. 1 billion is such a hard number to wrap your head around. And billions of deaths. How are you even supposed to begin comprehending that? It's like, so long, 90% of the human race, we hardly knew you. In light of such existential horrors, I've made it a point to keep busy. I performed a quick inventory of the supply closet. I was shocked to find that, despite being abandoned for who knows how long, there are enough water tanks and boxes of hardtack to last us months. Good thing, too. The others had a vote while I was gone and decided that, if it came to it, they'd eat me first. Not sure I share their opinion, but hey, it's nice to be thought of. April 3rd. Things are going okay. Our basic needs are met. Food, water, shelter. We have enough fuel to keep the lights on a while. And, most importantly, no one's had a psychological breakdown. Yet. On paper, that's a win. The main problem, the thing that's really eating us, is the lack of things to do. Not just boredom, though that is a factor, but the sheer helplessness. The fact that we're all trapped in this lead-lined box meters under the earth and can't do a blasted thing about it. Our old lives are in tatters, our future is questionable, and our only option is to sit and wait and listen to the radio spit out static. We've been keeping the old thing on in hopes of picking up some signal from the outside world, but so far, nothing but distorted white noise. In fact, the more we crowd around it, the more distorted it gets. Even the supplies we found haven't brought much relief. No one's really been that hungry, what with all the stress, and we've only really been gathering as a means of passing the time. It could be worse, of course. Things could always be worse. I've been reminding the others of that, to their continued annoyance. It was on my third reminder that Lowry decided to challenge me, asking how exactly things could be worse. I told him they could nuke us twice. That got a few laughs, shaky and hope-deprived as they were. Tucker suggested that the bombing could be followed up by an invasion. Soldiers dropping in to claim territory and clear out survivors. Fielding argued that there was no way they'd send living troops into this radiated wasteland. Killer robots, on the other hand, were a very real threat. Wyndham, ever the B-movie connoisseur, questioned the possibility of giant mutated insects burrowing down to get us. Boole assured us all that wasn't how radiation worked, but did openly wonder whether the explosion would attract the attention of extraterrestrial life. I consider that an improvement. If aliens did come down, the fallout would probably kill them, and we could make off in their ship. Talk about two problems canceling each other out. Maybe it was the sheer absurdity of the situation, but discussing the many ways we could all die horribly seemed to actually lift our spirits. For the first time since the world blew up, we were something akin to joyful. It'd be great if we can keep it up. April 4th. We've decided to start divvying up responsibilities within the shelter, each person taking on a job. Boole and Fielding doing maintenance, Tucker manning the radio, Wyndham handling cleanup so we don't keep half tripping over these heaps on the ground. Nobody objected. I think we were all eager for something to do. I, interestingly enough, was left in charge of recreation. making sure we didn't all go mad with boredom. Being a natural entertainer, I graciously accepted my post as court jester. Luckily, on top of the bare necessities, our little sanctuary was stocked with a small collection of reading material. Mostly older classics, with a few dime store novels thrown in. Bit dry for my tastes, but you know what? Probably for the best. It'd be a downright tragedy if all that future generations knew about Shakespeare were what little I could remember from high school English. One particular volume caught my eye. A collection of horror stories. It was full of chilling tales. Nefarious cults committing forbidden rites. Hapless miners digging too deep. Restless phantoms walking amongst the living, unaware of their own demise. The kind of fantastic terrors that drew one's mind away from the horror that was real life. It seemed an appropriate diversion, given our circumstances. That's what you're supposed to do after the end. Sit around the fire and tell stories. Admittedly, it won't be half as atmospheric without an actual campfire, but I'm none too keen on burning up all our oxygen. April 5th. Something impossible happened. Lowry's gone. I don't mean unconscious, or catatonic, or even dead, probably. He's just gone. Vanished into the ether. It's kind of crazy. I mean, this bunker is 2 small rooms and a closet. How do you hide from 5 other people? Where do you go? Most unbelievable of all, no one knows what happened. When Boole first asked where he was, we thought she was joking. But sure enough, we glanced around, and there he wasn't. We looked for him, of course. Called his name, checked what little space there was. None. He was definitely here this morning, complaining about breakfast, the whistling in the vent, the static of the radio. How does someone just disappear? The simplest explanation is that he just up and left. Got tired of the rest of us and took his chances with the fallout. As Tucker pointed out, however, there was a glaring flaw with the explanation. The fact that the shelter door was, and still is, locked shut. Even on the off chance that Lowry could have made it 5 steps out there without keeling over, there would have been no way for him to seal the door from the outside. Not unless someone else closed it for him. That, in and of itself, raises a terrifying possibility. One that none of us are willing to speak aloud. And though I never accuse anyone here of stealing a stapler, let alone knocking someone off, it is disturbingly feasible. We've all been jammed in here, scared and vulnerable, little to no hope of ever going back to our normal lives. Saner people have snapped from less. It's honestly stressing me out, just to write it down now. I know I usually try to be the optimist, but beginning to think that this is one of those rare occasions where things actually could not be worse. April 6th. Well, I was wrong. Things have gotten worse. One may ask, oh no, did one more person disappear? To which I would reply, no actually, 2 more people disappeared. Things were tense after yesterday. A nameless dread lingering in the stale air of the bunker. For safety's sake, we decided to sleep in shifts. At least 2 people awake at all times. No one was sure that'd actually do anything. We'd all been awake when Lowry vanished. But the illusion of security was better than nothing. I, personally, had trouble closing my eyes that night, unable to dispel the nagging thought that they'd never open up again. Imagine my surprise at being awoken hours later by a frantic Wyndham, stutteringly informing me that both Boole and Fielding were missing. That got me out of bed. The 2 of them had taken the first and second watches, respectively, being the most tolerant of each other's presence. Tucker, Wyndham, and I wasted no time in repeating yesterday's search, scouring every inch of the shelter for some trace of our misplaced bunkmates. Like yesterday, however, we came back empty-handed. I don't know what to think. They wouldn't have just left. They couldn't have just left. If the Geiger counter's anything to go by, they wouldn't last a minute out there. Unless that's the twist, that the counter is wrong and everything is fine outside the shelter. But if that is the case, where is everyone? Why wouldn't they come back down to get us? Tucker insists that there is a reasonable explanation, but I'm starting to fear that reason went with the rest of civilization. Wyndham, on the other hand, is growing paranoid. Tad more than what I'd say is strictly necessary. He keeps asking Tucker how he had known this church had a fully stocked shelter. If there really was nobody on the radio. If he was sure he didn't know what happened to the others. Tucker, taciturn as always, is refusing to engage. A sound move, were it not also kind of suspicious. I feel like I should intervene, prevent things from escalating, but at this point I'm not sure it would even help. I think it would be best just to step back and let this conflict sort itself out. April 7th. Looks like I'm 2 for 2. Shockingly, things did not cool down. I was greeted this morning by the furious shouts of Tucker and Wyndham, flinging threats and accusations at the other. It quickly became apparent that they wanted me to take a side. Naturally, I did the only fair thing. Grab a box of food, a tank of water, then lock myself in the bathroom. Was this cowardly? Yes. Did I care? More than you'd think, but less than you'd hope. The important thing is that whatever's going on, it's on the other side of that door. So, here I am, stuck in an even smaller box than before, crouched beside the chemical toilet, trying to ignore the shouts and curses of desperate men. This just isn't my week. April 8th. It's quiet. After so much time with so little privacy, I'd almost forgotten what real quiet was like. Tucker and Wyndham are gone, same as the others. Might as well lead with that. I waited until the shouting stopped, then 30 minutes afterwards, before daring to peek my head out the door. Just as I feared, nothing. No Tucker, no Wyndham, no anybody. Just an empty, lifeless bunker. It could be worse. Probably. Not really. Starting to feel the isolation now. That claustrophobic loneliness typical of the post-apocalypse. Reminds me of an old horror story. The last man on Earth sat alone in a room. There was a knock at the door. That's where I am now. Sitting alone, waiting for that knock. Don't really care who's at the door. Killer robots, invading aliens, mutant bugs. Just so long as I have something to listen to other than that incessant whistling from that blasted vent. You'd think Lowry would have fixed that. He complained about it enough. Or Boole and Fielding, they were on maintenance duty after all. Heck, or even Tucker and Wyndham. They were just about to tear the shelter apart at the end. You'd think one of them would have bothered to peek inside. I'm an idiot, aren't I? April. I looked inside the vent. Wish I hadn't. Because now I know. Bet that's all it takes. Knowing. Now I'm fading fast. No pun intended. If there's one silver lining, I won't have to wonder where the others went. They never left. How many times did we walk right over each other without realizing? We should have known. Should have noticed how the radio got all distorted when we were near. The fact that we were never hungry or really that tired. Heck, the shelter was a dead giveaway. They wouldn't have abandoned it if it were functional. Not much I can do about it now. Can barely move this pen. Not that I have anything profound to write. Suppose the best thing I can give is a bit of advice to whoever finds this book. If you're ever trapped in an airtight bunker with only one vent, check it sooner than later, just in case it's blocked. Thank you.
Did you want it to come down, or is it okay?
I think this is fine. Can you all hear me? Can you hear me? Yes. Okay, great. Then we're good. Good evening.
Good evening.
I'm Linda White, a longtime member of this writing group, and very happy to be here this evening. It's great that we're back at Kelly Writers House reading. And I've been working on a novel for a little over a year now that is basically, the plot is driven by letters between two sisters, one who lives on the East Coast and the other lives on the West Coast. They're young. They were in their early 20s, and it's 1968, and there's a lot going on. And so they're learning a lot about the world and each other and having all these fantastic experiences. The sister that lives on the East Coast is the one who is basically the primary plot driver or the protagonist. And the younger sister is on the West Coast, and her goal in life is to become a filmmaker. And the sister on the East Coast, her goal is to become a poet. Now, poets don't make a lot of money, but she hadn't really thought about that. She just really wants to get her voice out there. She wants to be heard. She has something to say. So I'm going to read two letters, one from one sister and one in response to the letter. And I'm also going to read one of the poems that the aspiring poet wrote. And I will warn you in advance that this is I guess an apprentice poet, for lack of a better phrase. She's not going to have anything that's like, really perfect to offer. But I'm going to read her poem in her voice, and I'm going to read the letters between the two sisters. And I hope you'll enjoy them. Okay, the first letter is from Eva, the sister on the East Coast. Much love and luck. Dear Eva, you must be crazy excited about getting on stage at the frontal lobe. I don't know a thing about the place, but Sheila told me that it's where poetry folks aspire to read, like playing the Palace. Sheila works with me. I wish I could be there, but since I can only be in one place at a time, especially with the time zones, I've got to be here. I'm sure you'll understand. You should have somebody tape record it. Don't you know somebody with a small reel-to-reel that you could sneak on stage and hide behind a curtain or in a flower pot? If I was there, I'd find one for you. I have a couple of performing tips. I saw a few theatrical productions out here at the neighborhood playhouse. That's actually the name. And I was blown away by the actors. They pass the hat at the end of each performance, but I don't know how they keep the doors open unless they're selling moonshine out the side door between shows. Number one, your stage presence is wrapped up in your wrappings. Do you have any lame, velvet, or sequins? Wear all of them. Grandma Donnie has a mink stole with those really creepy eyes. See if you can borrow that. Too bad the eyes don't blink. Number two, I know you can be loud and obnoxious. Keep that going and make sure that every person, every termite, every passerby hears every word you say. Bring them into your space. New Yorkers are loud, so go ahead and fit in with them. While you're up there, are you going to the Statue of Liberty or the Empire State Building? I was just watching King Kong the other night, so I thought of it. I would love to see Manhattan from the rooftop of either one if I could. I just wouldn't scream, "Let me go!" if a big old ape had me in its grip. You know I'm rooting for you, love. You're gonna knock 'em dead. They'll fall for you like bowling pins hit by Fred Flintstone's bowling ball. You'll have to tell me all about it when you get back. You're well on your way to becoming Queen of the Word. I'm proud to be your sister. Much, much love and luck, Lee. Okay, the next part of this is actually this scene at the frontal lobe on the night that Eva's going to read. The crowd at the frontal lobe was dressed as if they just climbed out of an acid trip, twirling in on tiptoe. Paisleys so bright that they spun and throbbed, reds so vivid that you looked for a Band-Aid to cover the wound, blues that you could dive into and splash around, and oranges that could have provided citrus refreshment at your command. Black eyeliner was the facial expression of choice for the women. Fuzzy beards and droopy mustaches framed men's smiles. Afros competed for height and volume. Locks of every hue grazed the backs and shoulders of male and female patrons. Eva looked like one of the Ikettes in a white crocheted mini dress and a pair of knee-high black vinyl boots. A row of people that looked like poet dignitaries were at the front of the stage. One woman held a clipboard and wrote with a pencil adorned with feathers. At 8 o'clock sharp, a hungry young man slid onto the stage. He snatched a microphone from its stand as if he was Elvis, about to burst into Jailhouse Rock. "Good evening, fellow humans. Good to see you here. Get comfortable and well lubricated. The bar is open. We got some out-of-sight talent for you tonight. So give everybody a warm welcome, warmer than usual. Some of these folks traveled to get here, and you know traveling takes a lot of bread, unless you hitch." The show rolled along seamlessly. Cigarette smoke clung to the trippy threads and natural hair of every patron and rose to the low tin ceiling. Everyone inhaled deeply of clove mingled with American tobacco. Eva stood behind the curtain, waiting for her introduction. She was number 5 on the list of performers. She hesitated to peek into the audience, preferring to imagine the usual sea of black-clad, dressed-for-mourning patrons, barely visible through the clouds of smoke. But when she heard the words, "And now, please welcome Eva Stone from Washington, D.C., and stepped out on stage, she was thrilled to be embraced by the crayon colors of the crowd. Her poem has no title. All make-believe, plastic people with nicknames want to rule us. Is Barbie or Barney Fife more real than the emotion I'm supposed to feel for a politician who would steal our young bodies in a deal for a freedom that no one would ever feel? Hungry children want a meal. They are too weak to feel the rah-rah when America wants us to kneel. Their stomachs are soft, not made of steel. No peace, my soul will never heal. The bags of young bodies on every newsreel. Workers are less than a cog in a wheel that doesn't carry them to a place of joy, excitement, or zeal. Would rather have Bugs Bunny run the show, all the tricks he'd already know. Evasion, persuasion, where to hide in the hollow. He's not real, just who I'd rather follow. And then the last piece is a letter from Lee on the West Coast back to Eva, basically responding to what Eva has told her about the performance at the frontal lobe. This letter, it sounded like church. Dearest Lee, guess what comic book hero came to the frontal lobe when I was there? Captain America. I saw him from backstage when I was checking out the crowd. Why didn't he bring Wonder Woman or the Green Lantern? Or maybe some bad guys for a little variety? I'd love to see the Riddler or Lex Luthor enjoying some live poetry. But it was that crazy costume lizard, Troy, again. I kept my distance from him, although he found his way backstage and listened to me rehearsing. Last night's cast was a quaint lineup of wordsmiths and one musician. Here's what the others laid on the unsuspecting listeners. Jerry Triangle. His music was supposed to mellow us out, but his genre of acoustic surf meets soul probably didn't give anybody good vibrations. Think Beach Boys meets Sly and the Family Stone. Stop frowning. Naomi Killjoy, a new voice from Queens. Her poetry was about a menage a trois that changed her views on pet ownership. You don't want to know more. Bailey Barnstorm, a veteran of the 1966 Village Poetry Wars, he emerged unscathed from a word war with local stars Vitamin E and Maggie Simpson. Luminosity, who read from her almost published collection, Blue-Lined Paper from the Notebook. I love that title. Molotov Tyler, Poetry for Anarchists. So I read a few of my opening lines, and all of a sudden, it sounded like church in there. First, a few auntie-like, percolated from the back of the room. I kept reading and heard a couple more moans and then a louder, preach, sister. I raised my head a few more times to make sure no one was about to get the Holy Ghost. Ever notice how many ushers it takes to hold one of those sisters down once they get to thrashing and dancing in the aisles? And you need a catcher's mitt for the wigs that go flying off in mid-thrash. I feel like I won that night. I got a good long round of snaps, and a couple of folks even stood up and whistled. The owner of the place gave me his business card and told me to contact him when I'm in town again. This is so exciting. Now, here's my shopping list for stuff you can bring me from California. A cute Spanish boy with long black bangs who tells me, te adoro, morning, noon, and night, especially at night. He'll have posters from Fillmore concerts and cool sunglasses that make him look like an artist and an outlaw. Bonus points if he has a guitar. I'd even settle for an empty guitar case. It'll add to his cool factor. We'll see you at the airport. Love you madly, Eva. And that's it. Thank you. And I don't remember who's next. Mary is next.
I feel as though I'm going to shift into a bit of a minor key after those two readings, but so be it. Is this at a good height? Am I audible? Okay. So I'm reading from a memoir. As of yet, it has no title. And I'm reading two bits from it. One is the preface. And the point of the preface is to define for myself and the reader why it is I'm undertaking this project. And then I'll dip into sort of later within the memoir, and there's a section there I'd like to read. So the preface begins with a quotation from the writer Hilary Mantel, and the quote is, "Each morning it is necessary to write myself into being." And the preface starts here. "From where I sit in the back seat of the car, I see Dad casting furtive glances at me in the rearview mirror as he drives along the highway. When he sees me turn my eyes toward him, he immediately averts his glance. Why doesn't he say what's on his mind? Why does speaking to me make him uncomfortable? Do I scare him somehow? Stop it, I'm not scary, I want to say. But I think that response would only make him withdraw into himself. Damned if I do, damned if I don't speak up. I remain silent. Dad presses down the accelerator, but then almost immediately, he presses the brake to rein himself in. Every few seconds, the car speeds up and slows, speeds up and slows. Why am I making him anxious? What gives? Recalling that drive now, years later, I wonder whether my older sister Judy's illness provides a partial answer. Judy was diagnosed with schizophrenia at age 14. I was 13. To Mom and Dad, her illness seemed to demonstrate that girls could bring only pain and disappointment. At least the boys turned out, I overheard Dad tell Mom one morning when I was in high school. Despite the many ways in which I was, in fact, excelling, Mom said nothing to counter him. I was the other girl among the 4 children in our family. Is that why Dad was afraid of me? McLean Psychiatric Hospital, Met State Hospital, my grandmother's farm, a halfway house or two. Judy didn't remain long anywhere. Her thoughts tumbled helter-skelter, pushing her to act impulsively. Sometimes she'd shove you, never violently. Sometimes she'd injure herself. Sometimes she'd run away. Words streamed from her mouth against her will, random ribbons of thought. To see her unravel from a slightly anxious, pretty little girl into a heavy, often incoherent and disheveled teenager was indeed frightening to every member of the family. Yet Judy's illness provides only a partial explanation of my parents' feelings toward me, their other girl. After all, they treated me as somehow different even before Judy's diagnosis. From my earliest years, my parents often acted as though I were invisible. I was the third of 4 children, spaced apart from one another by only about a year. From early on, I was the quietest of my parents' brood. They must have found it easy to forget I was there in the tumult of daily life in a large family. But often they didn't just forget I was there. They actively chose me as the designated persona non grata, the excess baggage they couldn't fit into the station wagon and left behind to stay with a neighbor. Why would they choose me in particular? Finding an answer to this question drives this memoir. By tracing events over time, I hope to more clearly delineate how my position in my family shaped who I am now. In doing so, and then this is Mantel's phrase again, I write myself into being. The story begins with my earliest memories and ends when I become independent from my family. All events are real to the best of my memory. Occasionally, I meld events that happened at different times into a single event. Where gaps in my memory make narrative continuity impossible, I add details that most likely occurred. So that's the preface. And then I'm going to fast forward. This is actually within the memoir, no longer the preface, and quite far into the memoir. And at this point, I'm age 20, and the section is called Fellowship. The sky was a flawless blue. The road curved uphill through manicured lawns and shrubs. I parked at the top, near Building 11. "You're here to see?" the woman at the front desk asked. "My sister, Judy." "You know she doesn't have outdoor privileges today, right?" the woman asked, looking down at her list. "Yes." She still made no eye contact. "I'll let the nurse know you're here," she said, reaching for the phone. "Judy's on the gold floor." I said nothing, why bother, and turned to the glass door in front of the staircase. As I mounted, I smelled cleaning fluid masking the sharp ammoniac odor of urine. A few black scuffs mark the otherwise spotless cinder block walls. I reached the 4th floor, the gold floor. Through the window pane on the door, I caught the eye of a man shuffling along in loose-fitting clothes. They must have belonged to someone else at one time. I waved to him and pointed to the lock on the door, but he kept shuffling past me. From a distance, down the corridor, a nurse noticed me gesturing outside the door. She ambled toward me. "Judy's sister?" Her voice was muffled by the window between us. "Yes." I nodded over-emphatically, uncertain what she could hear. She pulled a ring of keys from her pocket and slowly rifled through them. At worst, the nurses here were indifferent. They were hardly the cruel Miss Ratched in One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. "You know she has no outdoor privileges," the nurse asked me as she opened the door. "Yes." "Judy," the nurse called down the corridor. "Judy, dear." My sister lumbered toward me, heavy from antipsychotic drugs. "Mary, Mary, Mary." She enthusiastically threw an arm over my shoulders, knocking me slightly off balance. She smelled of sweat, and her unwashed hair clung to her scalp. We walked past other patients on the corridor. Some were glassy-eyed from staring at the TV, others watched us with interest. "That your sister, Jude?" a man asked. His hands dangled at the ends of his long arms, his fingers trembling slightly. Judy ignored him. "Let's sit here." She pulled over 2 molded plastic chairs. We sat side by side, facing the window, our backs turned from the corridor. The sky was cloudless, but our view was obstructed by the metal grille lining the window panes. How to converse? "Have you seen Mom and Dad recently?" I attempted. "Mommy, Mommy," Judy exclaimed. "I saw them last week in New Hampshire," I continued. "Jane McCarthy always got on my nerves," Judy said, recalling a classmate from years ago out of the blue. "Why was that?" I asked, trying to guide the course of our conversation down a single pathway. "Charlie is Jesus Christ," Judy went on. Sometimes her craziness is not so crazy, I thought. Charlie, our younger brother, struck me as the most open-hearted member of the family. "Have a light?" a man asked us, stopping by our chairs, holding out a cigarette in one hand and scratching his large belly with the other. "Sorry," I said, glancing up at him. "Buzz off," Judy grumbled softly as he walked away. "Jude, that your sister?" the man who had asked this question earlier repeated. Again she ignored him. "Maybe next time we'll be able to go out somewhere," I said, trying to maintain Judy's attention. When allowed out of the building, she was always enthusiastic about going for a milkshake. She said nothing as she fished for a cigarette. "Have you watched anything good on TV?" I asked. She frowned as she searched for words. Her whole body tensed with the effort. "Maybe you should go now," she suggested, but I didn't budge. She pulled a cigarette from her pocket, lit it, and smoked without a word. "Want one?" she asked eventually. "Sure." I didn't smoke, but I took the lit cigarette she offered me anyway. I inhaled slightly, trying not to let the smoke travel down my windpipe. For 5 minutes, we sat side by side. She smoked, I smoked. Then I said goodbye, and that's it.
I'm going to read 2, I think, rather different pieces. This first one is from a developing series I'm doing that I call Instructions. But usually the instruction is completely opposite from what you might feel, or you don't think you need an instruction in it, anything like that. So this is an example of that, called How to Use a Leaf Blower. A leaf blower can come in handy if you happen to find yourself in the middle of a melee, rhubarb, or fracas, especially one sparked by a slighting reference to one's parentage, and/or parenting, or by a slur against one's home team. Hold the leaf blower firmly with both hands near the end of the nozzle and swing it in an arc. If they aren't already in its orbit, your co-combatants will likely keep safely clear. You may even want to emit a few Viking berserker howls to enhance the effect. A leaf blower can be very useful when you visit your attic, looking for your old LPs of Styx, REO Speedwagon, and Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show, and you have to make your way past a dense, forbidding network of cobwebs. Hoist the blower into place, turn on the power, and blast those suckers into nothingness. Then, once you've cleared a path to the trunk and brought your LPs down to the kitchen table, the same leaf blower can be wielded efficiently to smash the albums into tiny pieces. A leaf blower can also come in handy to chase those demanding little brats away from your porch on Halloween when you've forgotten to turn out all the lights. It can also serve as a paperweight on a large desk, holding down your pile of angry letters to the editor of your local newspaper. But whatever you do, never use a leaf blower for the perverse function for which it was originally designed. A leaf blower is much more noisy and no more accurate than a plain old rake. And I've yet to hear a convincing argument that it actually saves time. If a rake was good enough for your father, grandfather, and grandmother, and before them, when it came time to deal with autumn's annual leaf fall, it sure as hell is good enough for you. Most people using a blower will pass over the same area of leaves several times before they get it just right. A rake is more flexible and more precise, and it will probably improve your hand-eye coordination as well. And if you put your leaf blower aside, think of all those grateful neighbors who won't have to hear your infernal racket and won't have to see you strutting about with the contraption as if you're some kind of specialized technician or weekend warrior, able to rattle off power-to-weight ratios and air force of 140 to 200 mph and a rating of 600 cubic feet of air per minute, when all you're doing is moving some dead leaves from one spot to another. Do you really need to inflict from 65 to 90 decibels of noise on the environment? The Christian Science Monitor once noted that leaf blowers can generate as much tailpipe emissions in 1 hour as an automobile does over 350 miles. True, I couldn't explain that if I had to, but it certainly sounds ominous. Things may have improved somewhat since then in the arcane field of tailpipe emissions, American ingenuity being what it is, but the equally American trait of technological overkill remains dominant. And don't get me started on all those Freudian implications of a leaf blower. Or perhaps you already knew those. Perhaps you enjoy toting such an instrument or tool that you can rival the volume of a Fender Stratocaster blasting from a Marshall amp. Go, Macho Man, give that Toro Power Sweep the juice. Crank that Black & Decker Leaf Hog to the max as you imagine yourself cruising down the highway with your buddies in black leather. Point the nozzle or staff or rod or barrel of your Homelight Vac Attack 2 at those sneering leaves and let them have it. And if you've gone the next step and bought a backpack model, no doubt you fantasize about soaring into the sky like 007 and a breathtaking escape from Smersh, more like George Jetson. Please do us all a favor and hang the leaf blower on your wall, along with your moose head and bowling trophy. If the urge comes to use it, do a few push-ups to burn off that excess energy. You'll be glad you did. We'll be glad you did too. But don't think that buying a leaf blower was a total loss. There are many other uses for your leaf blower. For example, if you stagger into your kitchen early one morning and find a caravan of red ants traveling from one palace of delights to another, you can send them flying with a few well-directed bursts. If you receive a telephone call from someone you really don't want to talk to, switch the leaf blower on and off at irregular intervals. Joe, is that you? I can't. Lots of static here. What did you say? Joe? It's no good. Try back tomorrow. In many cases, your caller will hang up before you get that far. If you and your spouse have had some harsh words and are not talking, you can use the leaf blower as a divider on the spousal bed. It would be like a scene straight out of a tale of chivalry. Then, if emotions have cooled in the morning, you can take the leaf blower away, thereby showing in unmistakable symbolic terms that she's still your honey. Your leaf blower, you see, is truly multifunctional, but please put it away until the situation truly demands it. This next piece is called A Dozen Days of Chaos, and I guess I'm helping to inaugurate the Yuletide season. The name is Culligan, Officer Griff Culligan. I've seen a lot of scary sights in my business, which is fighting crime and trying to give our citizens the peace of mind that goes with law and order. But I'm not sure anything comes close to the horrifying spectacle I came upon during the Yule season a few years ago. I'm in my patrol car when the word from headquarters comes in. Situation developing at 342 Farragut Place. Distressed woman, wild animals, rambunctious crowd, threatening chaos. Get down there, ASAP. Roger, I said, even though the dispatcher hates the word. I'm on it. It took me only a few minutes to get to 342 Farragut Place, but even before I reached the end of the cul-de-sac, I smelled trouble. And I mean that literally. The street really stunk. I wasn't sure what it was, animal odors, bird droppings, human sweat, or more likely a big bundle of smells. Then the noise, squawking, howling, shouting, cursing, loud and rather unrhythmic drumming. I could swear I even heard some fervent mooing. Then I saw it all. The lawn of 342 Farragut Place was a circus, but without the big top. Even before getting out of the patrol car, I radioed in for backup. Lots of it. Close to the curb, I spot a kiddie pool that couldn't have been more than 5 feet in diameter. And blow me down if there weren't more than 3 dozen swans trying to squeeze into that little space. As we later verified, 42 swans in all. It was horrible to see. The mass of white feathers, the bills poking, the wings flapping, the creepy noises of fowl crying foul as they fought for room to swim. I just climbed out of the car when an enraged goose goes whizzing by. It was chasing a hen, but said hen seemed to be wearing a black beret. What the hell? I see the crowd of neighbors in the cul-de-sac, but I figure I'd better check out 342 first. As I head to the front door, about 30 guys, all dressed up like they were strolling in the gardens around Buckingham Palace, come running at me. Or I should say jumping. Some of them were obviously dragging and could hardly get off the ground. Others were still giving it the old school try. But from the expressions on their faces, it wouldn't be long before they just flopped on the grass. And that would be too bad because I could tell that the clothes they were wearing would cost me at least 2 weeks' salary. Some of them even wore doublets. Settle down, I shouted, wishing I had a megaphone. Stop all that jumping up and down. Hallo, replied one of the men sharply. It's not jumping, it's leaping. Yes, old chap. We're 10 lords a-leaping, said another, giving me a rather snooty look. Pardon my French, mister, but there's a lot more than 10 of you here. And that, Mr. Constable, is precisely the problem, said the first speaker. He paused in his leaping, to catch his breath. Simon, Edward, Henry, Andrew, Edward, Simon, St. John, Henry, Harold, and I arrived at this rather unprepossessing house 3 days ago, eager to do our leaping routine. And you are? I asked, notebook ready. I'm also Andrew, he said. We leaped hither and yon and hither in one of the best performances we've given. But comes the morrow, and who arrive on the scene but another 10 lords a-leaping? I ask you, what is the meaning of it all? Precisely, said another of the lords, Simon, by the way, he added, spotting my notebook. He took another leap, then stepped closer. There seems to have been some terrible misunderstanding. I'll admit it's unusual. Whether it's unlawful will be up to the judge. Behind me, the crowd started chanting, "We want our neighborhood back. We want our neighborhood back." They were looking kind of upset, and I can't say I blamed them. Stay back, please, I shouted. We'll handle this. Oh, officer, you're here at last. I turned around to see the apparent mistress of 342 Farragut Place bearing down upon me. And you are? Letitia Blenkinsop, she replied. What am I going to do about this calamity? I was happy, quite happy, I can say, when the FedEx man arrived 12 days ago and delivered a very nice pear tree with, if you can believe it, a partridge in it. I love pears and I have no bias against partridges as long as they know their place. She took a deep breath. The following day, what arrives but 2 turtle doves and another partridge in a pear tree? So, of course, I asked the FedEx man whether there had been a mistake. And he replied, he said, no, it's stated right here, another partridge in a pear tree. So I said to myself, all right, Letitia, you can handle this. There's certainly enough room in the backyard for 2 pear trees. She shook her head. If only. Let me get this straight, Ms. Blenkinsop. For 12 consecutive days, you've received these strange presents? She gave a strangled sound that could have been a yes. Her shoulders were shaking. And for a while there, I thought I could handle it all, but the swans were very difficult, especially when it didn't stop at 7, but 7 a day for 6 days. Understandable, Ms. Blenkinsop. I'll admit the noise was getting to me. I wheeled around and pointed to the group of about a dozen men banging on their drums. Somewhat listlessly, perhaps, but I could see that spending a whole day doing that could get tiring. Knock it off, fellas. This is the law speaking, and we're asking for some peace and quiet. A couple of the drummers slackened their banging a bit, but most of them just ignored me. I considered wading into them with my nightstick. But, officer, if you only saw what the cows did, said Ms. Blenkinsop in a piteous voice. The cows? I turned back to her, wondering where the hell my backup was. I wasn't going to mess with cows. Yes, on the 8th day of this nightmare, the FedEx van, actually there were 3 of them by this point, rolled up and out came 8 wholesome-looking young women. That was bad enough because there was no room. She tried to regain control of herself, but each of them had a cow that they were supposed to milk. In the end, I had to find space for them in the living room. I just can't stand it. Pardon me, Miss Blenkinsop, but do you have any idea who is behind this fiendish plot? Do you have any enemies? People who have sworn vengeance? No, it's all a mistake. It couldn't have been what he intended. That's for the law to decide, isn't it? Does this he have a name? She broke off again. But he meant well, I'm sure. It just goes to show what happens when you get an idea in your head and you have the wherewithal to carry it out. The wherewithal? He's rich. She sniffed and wiped a tear away. I need a name, I said, persistent as ever in the pursuit of justice. He's my true love. I'm afraid that won't suffice in court, Ms. Blenkinsop. There was a cry over to the left of the lawn. To my disgust, one of the leaping lords was chasing one of the dancing ladies and had already torn off part of her dress. Hey, buddy, stop right there, I shouted. Lords and ladies, you couldn't trust them as far as you could throw them. Then came the sirens. I peeked over my shoulder. 3 more patrol cars were racing up the cul-de-sac. At last, reinforcements. We never did nail the perpetrator of this heinous crime. As for Miss Blenkinsop, once the trees, birds, animals, and persons were cleared from her house, she refused to testify. So the books aren't closed yet, which is why I still get a shudder when Christmas time rolls around and those damn carols start playing. But I'll be ready if another richer-than-thou psychopath pulls something like this again. After all, that's my job. Thanks.
Everyone, thanks for coming out. My name is Amy Miller. I also have a memoir. It's called Boulevard and Bates. It is a love letter to Pittsburgh and the space-time continuum. Please enjoy. My sister Becky blew out her knee doing a side aerial during her sophomore year of high school. That was her last gymnastics move. Her injury was so severe that it required a sports medicine specialist. We didn't have any of those near our home in Watsontown, Pennsylvania, which had a population of 2,000 and contained 2 stoplights, but it was the area's urban center compared to the vast soybean and Christmas tree farms where my friends lived. Although lacking surgical experts, we did have the gymnastics and dance studio where this fateful trick was learned. Almost every girl within a 20-mile radius took classes there, including me. Our teacher had performed as an acrobat on the Ed Sullivan Show. Becky was a far better gymnast than I, but not a champion. Nevertheless, she got a rather famous doctor who operated on Steelers and Penguins at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, which was a 4-hour drive through the mountains. I was a little worried about Becky, but this was the best week of my short life thus far. I was in 3rd grade and got to miss a week of school. Our older sister Deb came along to babysit me while Mom, Dad, and Becky were at the hospital. Our hotel was on the Boulevard of the Allies, the grandest name for a street I'd ever heard. The road we lived on didn't even have a name. Our address was Rural Route 2. To get to the boulevard, we had to summit Bates, the steepest street I'd ever seen. So steep, I thought our car was going to roll backward into the river as we made our ascent. The internet was almost a decade from existing in our home, ubiquitous smartphones unimaginable. Somehow, Deb researched bus routes, and we went all over the city to the zoo and the Carnegie Science Center. When we got home, Becky's arms were covered in tracks from the morphine drip at the hospital. She sat in the recliner for weeks so her knee could stay at a certain angle. The doctor said to take ibuprofen by the bucketful. It won't hurt you. Had this taken place a few years later, they probably would have sent her home with a bucket full of Oxy. After the trip, I couldn't get Pittsburgh out of my head. The hills covered in houses, sparkling skyscrapers, countless bridges, and roaring rivers. I made it my life's goal to get out of Watsontown. In 5th grade, I started playing the oboe, and that's eventually how I did it. At first, this meant other small towns for lessons and festivals, but I was finally back in a city in 2002 to play in the Pennsylvania All-State Orchestra at Philadelphia's brand new Kimmel Center for the Performing Arts. Until then, I had only played in high school auditoriums. Walking on stage for the first time, I thought that someplace so beautiful couldn't be real, let alone somewhere I would have a concert with its cello shape, red velvet seats, shiny ash-colored stage, and balconies stretching to the sky. To recognize this accolade, my portrait hung in the high school hallway next to the all-star athletes. I headed back to Pittsburgh a couple of years later to major in music at Duquesne University. My cool new friends ripped filters off of cigarettes and smoked them until they were so small their fingers burned. They spoke with thick Pittsburgh accents they couldn't hear and used curse words as punctuation. The city was our campus and our extracurricular activity. I led field trips the way that Deb had, taking the bus to the mall or to international restaurants near Carnegie Mellon. We watched friends' bands play at parties on the slopes, commuting by staircases with street signs, trying to breathe in, internalize the sweeping views that instead caught in our throats, they were so spectacular. We lived at the Beehive, which was still an internet cafe. It had a vending machine that sold paperbacks and condoms. We'd get cheap rush tickets to the Pittsburgh Symphony and go to concerts in our hoodies. Afterward, we'd return to school to practice. Inspiration and inferiority from the concert fueling our etudes until security kicked us out of the building. Pittsburgh's triangular shape and staggering vistas from the bluffs became part of my bones, and over time slightly less confusing, although every Pittsburgher seemed to have a story about taking the wrong bridge and 4 hours later finding themselves in West Virginia. I, too, discovered new universes by going the wrong way down Ophelia and Juliet because everything looked backward, looping around Squirrel Hill and East Liberty when I should have gone through. I had an even deeper appreciation for Deb navigating the buses all those years prior. In the spring of that majestic year, I got set up with the coolest guy in school. On our first date, wandering through Oakland near Pitt, I started to sense that I'd been to this part of the city before. His apartment was at Boulevard of the Allies and Bates Street, that intersection with the steep, steep hill I first encountered when we brought Becky out for her surgery. The hotel was still there, catty corner to his place, a tall twin with bay windows, and of course, a flight of stairs on the hillside leading to the front door. I spent a lot of time in that bivouac for our long-distance summer romance of smoking and reading Joyce during band rehearsals. Every trip into the sunset, I thought about how when I first learned to drive, I imagined getting on Route 80 and going west to the ocean. I'd looked it up. Interstate 80, which was a couple of miles from our house in Watsontown, went all the way to California. My finger traced its path in the road atlas, across states, across the country, from one page to another. Instead, my new life compelled me to exit to the tiny city spilling over cliff sides. After Pittsburgh, I moved to Philadelphia for grad school. One of the first things I did was go to the Curtis Orchestra concert at the Kimmel Center, which was a few blocks from my apartment, the distinctive arched glass roof in view the entire walk up 15th Street. I snagged a free ticket from someone in line, and while waiting for the concert to start, I flipped through endless pages in the program listing benefactors to Curtis. I'd later help get these donors and create these lists when I started working there a few years later. After tuning, the concertmaster and head of the school announced from the stage a special performance, the slow movement of Mozart's Sinfonia Concertante, in memory of an important Curtis patron who had just passed away. Many years later, piecing together details shared by my husband Richard and his family, I would realize that his dad was the patron who had died. Excuse me, this is hard to read out loud. He chaired Curtis's board for many years. Countless performances drew me to the Kimmel Center over the subsequent years. But in 2012, the aberration of playing there in the Pennsylvania All-State Orchestra became a dream realized once more. I produced and played a chamber concert on Commonwealth Plaza under the Kimmel's glittering roof to celebrate its 10th anniversary. We were the opening band, as I like to call us, for the Philadelphia Orchestra's popular New Year's Eve concert. I kept assimilating myself into Philadelphia over the next decade, and while I felt immense pride when my husband declared that I had finally perfected the love-hate relationship that defines being from here, my infatuation with Pittsburgh remained. A year ago, Richard and I traveled there together for the first time. He had never been, although his dad was chief of staff to Governor Schaap in the 70s, which I thought would have entailed a diplomatic mission further west than than Harrisburg. This was not the case, but there is a favorite family photo of a tiny Richard holding a Steelers pennant with his parents at the gubernatorial inauguration. We talk about moving so much that as I drove, I started to wonder if somewhere we'd never considered would make so much sense, if this trip would convince us that Pittsburgh was where we were meant to be. I appreciated the mountains so much more than I ever did when I didn't look at anything else. Chestnut Hill and Manioc never providing a proper substitute. Pittsburgh pulled the fibers of my core like iron filings to a magnet and drew the gas pedal to the floor. I wanted to drive around without GPS to see how much I remembered, and so Richard could experience the tradition of taking the wrong bridge or tunnel. But we decided to take advantage of technology to get to our Airbnb and save adventure for after we unpacked. When we got close, Richard typed in the exact address, and the phone told us we were about a mile away. As soon as I drove into the exit lane, I knew where it was taking us. I turned right and saw the same hill up Bates Street that stretched before us some 30 years prior when my family arrived to take Becky to UPMC. My heart raced as it did after the Pittsburgh Symphony concerts. "You're gonna love it here," I told Richard. "Philly is too flat. We had to walk our bikes up this one for sure. You know, if you Google Street View this block, there's a dude walking his bike up this hill." The tall houses with bay windows still stood at the top of Bates Street. I could see dozens of new condos down the boulevard closer to Pitt, but not on this block. Memories started flooding back and would continue to do so all weekend. Synthesizers and theremins blared in my ears. I felt the glass pipe between my lips and smelled incense in the tapestry fibers. I saw our ghosts on the roof, the kite overhead. I made Richard retrace paths to all my favorite places, although my knees protested the hills I'd revered. We went to the mattress factory and stood silent in the pitch black room until we couldn't take it, and tripped around millions of our reflections in the polka dot mirror installation. We played with silver clouds at the Warhol and drove by his first house on Dawson Street near Edith and the Boulevard of the Allies. We rode the Gateway Clipper with 36 tourists from Mexico wearing Steelers ponchos, and later joined them to cheer a thrilling victory over the Ravens. I sobbed during the oboe solo of the Pittsburgh Symphony's performance of the Barber Violin Concerto. Even with GPS, we took some wrong turns, spiraling around the point, although we didn't go to West Virginia. But not everything was the same. My friends were scattered around the globe. The Beehive was a fast food restaurant. The Tree of Life Synagogue was surrounded by a chain link fence covered in drawings made by students from Parkland, Newtown, and Littleton. I moved away too soon, which is probably why I keep wanting to go back. But the trajectory led me to Richard, so it wasn't a mistake, and the memories don't match our reality anymore. We want to be an hour and a half from New York and the ocean. We want our rectangular city with its orderly grid. We want to keep building our world together, not open time capsules of who we were. So when the weekend was over, with the sunset at our backs, we drove home to South 15th Street, 10 blocks from my first apartment here. Streets are solar systems, and I am a comet, reappearing to measure time past. The gravity of these spaces pulls me back again and again, but one day we'll use it like a slingshot to go to the edges of the galaxy. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Holman Massey, and I've been working on a science fiction novel for some time, and this is a rewrite of the first chapter. The Peoples of Kanash, Chapter 1, the year 422 of the Eridanus expedition. Bobby Wardall, director of Planetary Survey for the Corps of Planetary Exploration and Colonization on Starship Beagle, looked at the video display of his console at Mission Control with a curiously remote expression on his face. His team had carefully maneuvered a sampling drone into place beneath a large outcropping of rock on the low foothills of a rugged mountain range on the planet Galena, far below. Wardall barked, "Hafez, what have you got?" Audrey Hafez, chief geology on the team, said, "We just got the drill in place." Wardall was silent. He waited impatiently as the machine gathered and analyzed his samples. When the data were transmitted, Hafez said, "KO, we bored through leucozine crust in 3 places, and below the crust, the scans show hematite ilmenite. Looks like high-grade ore, iron and titanium. Samples have been stowed for analysis." Wardle simply said, "Continue sampling the formation down to that break in the ridge." When the sampling run was complete, the rover's operators directed it to return to Columbia Research Station, a robotically assembled base situated in more even terrain over 50 kilometers from the sampling site. They chose a shortcut on the way back, only to stumble upon a group of indigenous creatures eyeing the rover suspiciously from up ahead. They were sturdily built, slightly taller than the average human, and they walked on 4 legs with an upright trunk that bore strong arms with 6-fingered hands. Their heads featured 2 large eyes resembling those of vertebrates on Earth, but their jaws opened from side to side, insect-like, each side flashing a pair of sharp white incisors. They looked like a chimeric hodgepodge of mantis and centaur, and their features were, and other features that were profoundly alien. Wardall said, "Not them again." As soon as he had said it, the view from the mast camera went blank. "What just happened?" One of the operators said, "Look at the HazCam feed." The hazard cameras mounted on the rover's undercarriage swung around to show the feet of one of the creatures. It had come up from behind and apparently disabled the mast cam. The operators unleashed a round of flashbang grenades from the rover that had sufficed to frighten the creatures away in the past. But within a minute, the creatures they had spotted up ahead joined the assault, pelting the rover with heavy stones. The operators fought valiantly to bring the vehicle home, but with the flashbangs exhausted, and the attack continued until the rover's antennas were disabled and contact with the vehicle was lost. The following day, Hafez had lunch with exobiologist Carl Marson at the Kopek canteen. She said, Jan came down hard on Bobby for not taking those creatures seriously enough. Marson raised his eyebrows. Like I've always said. So what would you call those things? They're cataloged as MZ1723, which doesn't quite do it. I don't know. You're the biologist. What would you call them? Martian shrugged noncommittally. Galenans, for lack of a better term, or centaurids. They're kind of like centaurs, except their mouths and a few other things. She laughed and said, "We call them mantars." Marsden winced. "Yeah, I've heard that. Surely we can do better." She smiled at him and said, "You're in biosurvey. Why aren't you all over this?" He looked disgusted. "You tell me. I transferred here from CDU 6 months ago with the intention of studying the biota of the planet. That's what's in my contract. And all they let me get my hands on is toxicology and containment. Same for the rest of biosurvey. That's important. So is understanding the fauna, as your rover fiasco so brilliantly illustrates. I know, I've been here 3 years, and it's frustrating to me too. We want to know more about those creatures for the obvious reason that they keep interfering with our equipment. But bring it up with Bobby, and you hit a stone wall. The flashbangs were his idea, as if a few explosives can fix anything. He has a team set aside in Geosurvey that is supposed to be investigating these creatures, the mantars. Says they're not that intelligent. And I ask, what are geologists and cartographers doing investigating the planet's life forms? Said Marson. Ask Bobby. Doesn't it raise an ethical issue? They're smart enough to throw stones. Oops. Did I? Excuse me. They're smart enough to throw stones. That too, but mention it, and mention it, and Bobby closes up. It's unnerving. He was my graduate TA in GeoLab when I was an undergraduate at CDU. He wasn't like that. We could ask him anything. He was very open and friendly. Seems like a completely different person now. Ignoring important things that should be paid attention to. Have you said anything? Early on, when I first came to Kopek, he just freezes. It's like he's fighting something. Not like the old Bobby at all. She was silent a second and said, "Weird." Taking it higher up? She hesitated. Not yet. I met him at CDU, but never got to know him. Now that I work for him, I can't say that I know him any better. And you're not in the loop on the 1723s. Nope. Well, she said with a note of consolation, in a couple of years we'll be down there, and you'll be able to meet them face to face. Year 413 of the Eridanus expedition, 9 years earlier. Graduation at Charles Darwin University was traditionally followed by a night of carousing throughout Darwin City, the capital city of Starship Beagle. Bobby Wardall had imbibed more than his share by the time he entered the Goat's Head Tavern with some of his fellow graduates. His doctoral degree did not improve his alcohol tolerance, and he was barely able to hold his head above the table when a buxom young woman approached and said with a most becoming smile, "You must be smart." His friends laughed and yelled, "Whoa!" in chorus as he raised his head to peer directly into her décolletage, presented at just the right angle as she leaned toward him. One of his friends said hopefully, "Yes, he's a doctor of geology and planetary sciences. Like me, I'm too." She crooned, "Wow. You must know a lot. I bet I can show you something you've never seen before." His friends were beside themselves. One, laughing, said, "No, he's seen it all. He's seen it. He's seen it all." Bobby was a notorious bookworm and reputedly had not seen all that much. He looked perplexed and said, "What have I seen?" She said, "I bet I can show you something better than anything you've ever seen before. Come, let me show you." Bobby was more confused than capable of apprehending any implication. He said, "K.O., where is it?" "Come with me." Her finger flicked his chin as she beckoned him to follow. As she turned, she tossed her head toward the back of the tavern, her red hair dancing off her shoulders with a flourish that Bobby found positively vertiginous. Her supple buttocks nearly brushed him in the face as he fought to retain his balance. She turned again and beckoned him to follow with a playful nod and a naughty smile. He rose unsteadily at the gleeful urging of his companions and followed. Deservedly overhung the following day, his fellow carousers were worried when he did not reappear. They were anxious to hear the report of his encounter, but their pings went unanswered. By the third day, they were ready to call the authorities when he showed up at the spaceport at Beagle's hub and departed on a fast transport to the Rama Aristarchus, far out in the asteroid belt, to begin a postdoctoral appointment. He left a curt message for his friends to take what they wanted from his flat. He had made arrangements to let it out at the end of the month. The cleaners would arrive in 2 days. They did as instructed, and eventually the incident faded in their memories. It was just weird. 2 years later, having completed his postdoc, he returned to Beagle to join COPEC as director of planetary survey. He renewed none of his friendships from his days in graduate school. His sleep was troubled. He dreamed uncomfortable dreams. And when he tried to remember that girl in the bar, it seemed a damper was imposed on his memory. That's when everything changed. And he forgot. In time, he forgot it all.
So hello again. I'm Llewellyn Fletcher, and I'm going to close the evening with a few poems. And I want to thank everybody for coming and sharing this time with us. It's been really great. I do have a few copies of my book here, if anybody wants to grab one, and of course I would sign it. And where am I? She says. You know, the book is not that big. Okay, here we go. Okay. So I want to read a few poems that I wrote during the time of COVID. I think all of these have been seen by the group, and the group helped me a lot with them. The first one's called Coltrane and David at Work. And the professor and chair of our department, David Roth, during COVID, we were out completely for 3 months. He tried to keep in touch with everybody in the department. We're in pathology and lab medicine, very large department. And he kind of did a blog, and he would tell us what he was doing, every day and or every once in a while. And once he posted that he was listening to Coltrane, kind of hearing him in a new way, as he was watching other people post about their sourdough starters. Do you remember? That was a big activities. So this is called Coltrane and David at Work. Make a list, set goals. Go outside, come back in. Stretch on a yoga mat. Make soup. Watch no news whatsoever. Let your head fall to pillow, a droplet on a map. Watch daily news briefings. Graft deaths like crooked arthritic fingers. My apartment is so small, but with John Coltrane here, it feels immense. Joyful notes mortared to sorrow. Leaning back into my chair, eyes closed, walls fall away. I'm not much tied to incidentals, but as his tenor sax snakes through a miniature brass camel caravan my parents bought decades ago in Egypt, coiling around the cleft hooves of the baby with barely one hump, I see themes of a new world, one not unkind to me, but equally unimpressed with everything human. Even the bruised yellow flowers in a geometrically absurd clay vase I brought from the desert when I thought of home as a warm, merry den, staging area for daily intercourse, commerce, my life, that doesn't exist here today, now that Coltrane has pushed out the walls and time's unmetered storms are imminent. One might venture graciously a question, even advocate. What can I do today? Shadows float, familiar memories. As clocks tick, John's horn spikes, and a pianist takes the challenge to heart today. Tear up your list, call a friend. I think the group remembers we totally reworked that. We flipped up the first and second stanzas, so thanks. This one's called Prayer for George. 1. After the ceremony, scotch, neat, my mother's best crystal, me seemingly, unseemly pajamaed, white as bean paste, no privilege by proxy, ungodly hot, my apartment, not on fire as the Reverend Al, not a burning neck pressed to cement, just hot enough to flick a switch, electric air, not God's air for breath. 2, one's name, that's important. Picasso's signature became art. Sharpton knows his is the name of an enslaver, callous owner of his great-grandparents. He makes his voice art. 3, at the University Community Town Hall, the Black medical student is asked to represent. You're from Colorado, oh really? That's where it starts. White people ask what it feels like to be me. Why don't they already know this? Telling you these stories doesn't make me feel better. 4, George let his niece scratch his head after work. He played hoops, liked to laugh. Religious mentor to Third Ward youth. Human guy, regular, reducible to breath, to body. His family in front of the cameras, his sister, his voice in the courtroom, fighting for justice, praying that fear would exhaust itself, that we might change. Thank you. Let's see. And I have one more COVID poem. This is called My COVID Swim. And it's after Bruce Coburn's Pacing the Cage, which is a really lovely lyric. And I wanted to write a poem that captures his rhythm, the rhyme scheme. And so if you go and listen to the song, you'll see how close I came or not. I'll take a sip. I wanted to write a poem perfect as my COVID swim. The Atlantic Ocean gray and roiling, me another swell within. Brighter than its silvery welts, surer than a tree, I'm diving in, shivering, free. This was September. It was really cold. I stretch and bob while floating, lucky whale lolling near a reef. Our lives are so uncertain now. Salt lips bring relief. I tell myself, hold fast this moment. Think of what's truest in your heart. You can't cry in the ocean when it's this cold. Still, I'm falling apart. Consider floaters from doomed ships, lost to endless sway and sky. When finally they arrive, they don't pause for thankless whys. If they'd never launched from land, they'd never been so lost, nor fully understand the worth of the cost. Words cannot touch what I scrape within, reaching for the warm, fluttery life, while casting only its skin. It's blue, really blue and cold, so cold, whitening you to your core. Nothing hurts anymore. And this is just plain smoky. And there's a portion where I veer off and I watch Unacknowledged, which claims to be a documentary about aliens. And as Sam said, if I really wanted to rest my brain, I should probably watch cooking shows. And you'll see that. But so it's not actually a true documentary, but it's in the poem. I think you'll see why. Just plain Smokey. It's not Smokey the bear, says my Southwest friend. Just plain Smokey. Of course she's right. Smokey's insufferable enough for a bear, but easy for kids. When did I forget my Scouts mantra? Yes, Smokey, we promise, as he intoned on the flickering TV. Only you can prevent forest fires. But this is just one of many things wrong these days. In a recent action pic, the elder hero tells the younger, there's no logic to who lives or dies, but you gave everyone a chance at life. A philosophical aside that works in a disaster pic where 6 of 8 make it to the life raft. But for our lives outside the movies, random deaths are unsettling. School shootings and a door ajar. A man puts his son in a dumpster to save him at the holiday parade. 60 bullets in one teen running away after a traffic stop gone bad. Okay. Getting off a regional train, a young man and I stopped to watch a bird that looked wrong. I've never seen a bird like that before, he said, taking a picture. The bird's whole belly was bloated to his chin as it tried to balance with a too tiny head. One wing was a yellow, pulsating bubble. Looks like a tumor, he said. Here we were becoming ornithologists. Christ, I thought, everything needs saving. I said, send your photos to animal control. They'll make the call, whether to come out or not. To make matters worse, and this phrase is tired, I watched a documentary on unidentified flying objects, thinking it would be relaxing, take my mind off things askew. But it culminated in speculation of a red flag op where our deep black state military will stage a fake invasion using AFOs, American-made flying objects, adapting the aliens' technologies. I don't know what hills we're going to run to now. By the way, aliens do exist, and they're terrified of us. They circle around every time we test an atom bomb, often successful saboteurs. These documentarians insist we can use alien physics to unleash energy. Fossil fuels would not be needed. people could grow their own crops in small villages. There would be no war, famine, climate change. Disaster pics would be entertaining again. It's a powder pigeon. The young man shows me online pics. He and the bird, now having made higher ground. Cousins of our puffed up friend, all looking similarly uncomfortable. He's not sick, he's molting. Someone put sunflower seeds on the tarmac, but the bird picks gingerly at the grass. He flew a little this morning, but he still looks tired. We name him Raleigh, just plain Raleigh powder. Thank you. So thank you, everybody. I'm surprised I'm the only poet this time. Hasn't really happened before, and I took all the digs about English teachers and English majors in stride. Thank you. Let's have some snacks.